So, Mars has several faces. No, really. Back in 1976, when the Viking 1 orbiter was checking out the red planet, it spotted something interesting, a big structure that looked like a human face. It was in the region called Cydonia. It soon became very popular. A bit later, we also discovered the so-called crown face in Libya Montes. Mars in general has a lot of strange structures on it. In 2022, we spotted a door-like structure there. NASA's Curiosity rover snapped some pictures of a rocky mound called East Cliffs on Mount Sharp. This mound has natural cracks in it, and one of them is about the size of a dog door, like something from an ancient Egyptian tomb. A lot of people hyped that story up. The image was shared widely on social media, making the crack look bigger than it really is. Some people think that it's hinting at extraterrestrial life. But after looking closely, NASA found out that it was just a narrow crack in the rocky terrain. These cracks and gaps are pretty normal in rocky areas, both on Earth and Mars. The crack formed naturally over time, maybe from wind erosion or Marsquakes. Mars is a gold mine of mysterious structures. Recently, we found some strange spiral shapes there. These are giant coils made of lava, and they look like big springs or loops. For years, we weren't sure whether Martian valleys were formed by lava or ice. These lava coils are shedding light on that mystery. Now, thanks to higher-resolution images from NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, researchers have spotted 269 lava spirals that can't be explained by ice-related activities. What's fascinating is these lava coils are like the ones we see on Earth, like those formed by Hawaiian lava flows. These spirals are so well preserved that they were easily overlooked before. They range from 16 to almost 100 feet wide and are subtle, blending into the dusty Martian landscape. These coils can teach us a lot about Mars's composition, especially its crust and mantle. We still don't know much about those. But Mars isn't the only planet with strange structures on it. For example, Saturn, the gas giant of our solar system, has a fascinating feature at its north pole, a huge hexagon. This is a hexagon-shaped cloud pattern. It's about 9,000 miles long, making it larger than the diameter of Earth. It's thought to be a jet stream made of gases moving very fast, at about 200 miles per hour. This hexagon was first spotted by the Voyager mission in the 80s, and later seen up close by the Cassini mission in 2006. The Cassini mission noticed a change in its color from blue to golden over time. There are different ideas about why Saturn has this thing. One theory suggests it forms because of the way winds move at different speeds near Saturn's poles. Similar shapes were created in lab experiments when liquids were rotated at different speeds. Another idea suggests that a slow spinning stream of air, along with Saturn's special weather patterns, might be responsible. In 2020, we found that when storms are surrounded by winds swirling in the opposite direction, they can create a steady hexagon shape. So far, this is the most likely explanation. Saturn also got lucky with the bizarre moons. One of them is called Lapidus. This moon has a weird feature, a huge ridge that wraps around its middle like a giant belt. This basically makes it look like a giant walnut. Where's my nutcracker? This ridge is incredibly tall by our standards, around 8 up to 12 miles high and stretching 124 miles wide. It covers more than 3/4 of the moon's surface and is considered the third largest mountain range in the entire solar system. Now, we don't have a clue about how this enormous ridge formed. It's unlike anything seen on other planets or moons. There's one idea, though. The ridge might be the remnants of a dead moon. Let's say billions of years ago, a colossal impact shattered chunks of material off Lapidus. These pieces circled around the moon, forming a mini-moon or sub-satellite. And over time, the gravitational pull of Lapidus tore this mini-moon apart, creating a ring of debris around it. As the debris from this ring fell back onto Lapidus, it built up the massive ridge we see today. They think this process happened quickly, maybe over centuries. Saturn's gravity didn't interfere because, luckily, Lapidus was quite far away from it. If Lapidus was closer to Saturn, its moon might have been pulled away. But we do need more simulations to see if this theory is true. Titan, another one of Saturn's moons, also has some weird stuff going on in its methane seas. Scientists have spotted these strange bright spots called magic islands that seem to pop up and disappear over time. We have no idea what they are. Titan's atmosphere is packed with complex organic molecules that clump together and fall to its surface like snow. These magic islands might be snow clumps that soak up methane and sink very slowly. But there's a problem. In water, molecules stick together, which is why stuff can float on top of it. But methane is different. It likes to grab onto other molecules, so it makes any solid thing sink immediately. Yet, these magic islands don't sink. There's a theory that these islands might be like sponges made of ice with lots of holes. When pieces of this holy ice come loose from the edge of the lake, they can float on Titan seas for a bit before going down under. There are also other ideas, like bubbles of nitrogen gas or waves caused by wind. We need more research to know for sure. Moons like to be weird. Just look at our own one. In 1971, we found a patch with missing soil on our moon, and it looks like a blue lake. They call this mysterious spot Ina. We first spotted it during the Apollo 15 mission in 1971. Later, the Apollo 17 mission took clearer pictures of it. This spot, shaped like a bluish D letter, is one of the weirdest things on the moon. The color comes from special rocks rich in titanium called basalts. These rocks cover Ina's floor and make it look blue. There are also bluish areas near the edges of the mounds inside Ina. Ina is unique and probably has a long history. It might have had volcanic activity, with mounds that are about 3.5 billion years old. It's similar to the surface age of the volcanic field that surrounds Ina. Now, our moon has its own face, just like those on Mars. There's an area near the moon's south pole that looks like a face, but it's just a bunch of craters and shadows that happen to make an image resembling a face when seen from far away. These craters have been there for billions of years and cover about 16% of the moon's surface. Some of these craters might even have water and ice inside of them. You might be wondering why there are so many faces in our solar system. Well, that's because our brains are wired to recognize faces, even when there aren't any. It's a phenomenon called pareidolia. Our brains try to make sense of shapes, so when we see something that looks a bit like a human, our brain turns it into one because it's familiar. Like when you see a shadow figure on a chair with clothes, or even on Mercury. Some people see shapes like Mickey Mouse. So don't worry, it's not extraterrestrial life. It's our brains that play tricks on us, making us see familiar shapes like faces even where they don't really exist.
Soon we might start constructing loads of stuff on the moon. All because India's moon mission has recently detected sulfur near the moon's south pole. This chemical element can come in extremely handy for creating infrastructure on our satellite. It's the first time this chemical element has been discovered on Earth's natural satellite. This sought-after element is mostly found near Earth's volcanoes. Its appearance on the moon speaks volumes about the satellite's volcanic history and its past atmospheric conditions. The mission's rover detected this chemical element less than a week after touching down around 70 degrees from the moon's south pole on the 23rd of August, 2023. This historic landing on the lunar surface made India the fourth country to safely land a mission on the moon. It's also the first spacecraft to touch down so close to the south pole of our satellite. It's an area of strategic importance because it's believed to be home to deposits of water ice. If it turns out to be true, future missions might be able to harvest it and turn this water ice into drinking water or even rocket fuel. For 2 weeks, the lander carried out the data collection, mainly focused on the analysis of the moon's soil and its extremely thin atmosphere. Meanwhile, the solar-powered Pragyan rover started its quest to find frozen water on the moon. As for the lander, it demonstrated another amazing feat on the 3rd of September. The spacecraft fired up its engines and lifted itself for about 16 inches into the air. Then it made a tiny hop to land 12 to 16 inches away from its original position. It's kinda a big deal. Being able to get a lander back off the surface of the moon is essentially for future missions, showing that they can safely return soil samples or even astronauts back home after a lunar mission. In September, the Indian spacecraft was put into sleeping mode. The 14-day-long lunar night was approaching, and the spacecraft wasn't designed to collect scientific data during this period of time. So far, we've learned about a few major findings of the mission. One is related to measuring the temperature of the moon's topsoil at different depths. Intriguingly, the surface of the satellite in that region turned out to be hotter than expected. It was believed that the temperature could be between 68 and 86 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface, but it was around 158 degrees Fahrenheit, way hotter than it should be. The other discovery indicates the presence of several chemical elements, including oxygen. Besides, the data received from the spacecraft confirms the presence of aluminum, calcium, iron, titanium, silicon, and other chemical elements on the lunar surface close to the South Pole. The rover also used special instruments designed to measure quakes and rumbles beneath the lunar surface to detect some seismic activity. It brings us back to the sulfur detected thanks to the rover's spectroscope. Scientists are currently working on figuring out whether this element formed on the surface in a natural way or whether it's the result of volcanic activity or a meteor strike. Another astonishing thing found on the moon is a rock, and it may be the oldest known Earth rock. A 0.7-inch wide chip included in a large rock collection brought to our planet by Apollo astronauts might actually be a 4-billion-year-old fragment of Earth. This finding could help us paint a better picture of the intense pounding early Earth got at the dawn of its life. It could go like this. Soon after the rock formed, an asteroid impact might have blasted it from Earth. At that time, our planet's satellite was 3 times closer to Earth than it is today. The collision was so powerful that this chunk of terrestrial rock found its way to the moon. Later, this fragment got engulfed in a lunar breccia, a motley kind of rock. Eventually, the rock was brought back home to Earth by Apollo 14 astronauts. Even though scientists had found meteorites coming from Mars and the moon before, it was the first time a rock from the moon turned out to be a terrestrial meteorite. They also found out that the rock had formed in a water-rich environment at temperatures and pressures corresponding to those at around 12 miles beneath the surface of our planet. In 2019, China's Chang'e 4 mission made history by landing on the far side of the moon. The mission's rover helped researchers visualize structures hidden deep below the surface of the satellite, revealing billions of years of lunar history. The Yutu-2 rover made this discovery with the help of its lunar penetrating radar. It imaged deep into the moon's surface and listened to echoes of sound bouncing back off structures hidden from view under the surface of the moon. It turned out those structures were resting at depths of almost 1,000 feet. The research suggests that the first 130 feet under the surface are made up of layers of dust, soil, and rocks. The instruments also discovered a concealed crater that must have formed after a large object slammed into the moon's surface. Long, long ago, ancient lava was likely to be flowing deep underground. Researchers believe that the broken rocks around the formation might be debris produced by the impact. They also found that the volcanic rock layers were thinner the closer they were to the surface. Such a thickness variation of lava flows might mean a decrease in the number and magnitude of eruptions over time. So, lunar volcanic activity gradually dwindled since the moon's formation around 4.5 billion years ago. On the far side of the moon, there is one of the largest and oldest impact craters in our solar system, the South Pole Aitken Basin. Unfortunately, from Earth, you can only see its outer rim, which looks like a huge chain of mountains. It's a ginormous 8-mile deep dent, stretching for more than 1,500 miles in diameter and covering 1/4 of the moon's surface. Astronomers are sure that this crater appeared when an asteroid collided with the moon around 4 billion years ago. And now, Look at this gigantic chunk of metal the size of 4 states of Connecticut. As for its weight in pounds, it's enough to say that the number contains 18 zeros. This mysterious mass is hidden about 180 miles under the moon's surface, somewhere in the middle of the South Pole Aitken Basin. It was discovered when GRAIL, which stands for NASA's Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory Mission, gathered data about our natural satellite. When examining this information, scientists noticed that in one place on the moon's surface, there was a weird change in gravity. After researching this phenomenon, they concluded that something mysterious was weighing down the basin floor there. So far, researchers haven't figured out the origin of the bizarre lump, but there are several theories. One of them claims that the finding is a chunk of dense oxide, which appeared when the moon was just taking its shape. At that time, the satellite was still covered with ancient oceans of magma, and the lump could be formed at the final stages of its cooling. However, most scientists support another theory, according to which the puzzling mass is part of the giant asteroid that once created the South Pole Aitken Basin. Since the thing is metallic, it's probably the iron-nickel core of the asteroid. There might be a labyrinth of lava tubes on the moon. Not so long ago, astronomers received the results of underground topography and discovered a massive cave under the surface of Earth's satellite. It could be the result of the lunar volcanic activity that happened more than 3 billion years ago. Streams of lava hardened, creating a thick, hard crust on the outside. But inside, it kept flowing, melting the rock and creating tunnels and caves. Numerous small pits in the moon's surface discovered by NASA seem to be the openings to such lava tubes. If this theory is confirmed, the underground tunnels might serve not only as a convenient location for human-crewed space missions, but also as much-needed water sources for astronauts. The moon is rusting, and chances are it's happening because of Earth. You'd say that since they're more than 230,000 miles apart, they can hardly directly influence each other in such a way, but they do actually have a special connection. The moon affects our home planet as well, and you can see it while observing ocean tides. As Earth rotates, the moon's gravitational force pulls the water on the nearest side of Earth. It creates a bulge. At the same time, another bulge forms on the opposite side because our planet rotates and it causes a centrifugal force. And then, the planet continues to rotate underneath these bulges, which is why we have 2 low and 2 high tides every day. Plus, the moon wobbles every now and then, tilts more or less, and causes changes in ocean tides. And in return, Earth's atmosphere is making our satellite rusty. Rust is that reddish substance you see on old gates or nails. Oh, and you know Vermilion Cliffs and the Grand Canyon? They also have that specific red color, thanks to rusty iron in the rocks. It forms when iron reacts with oxygen and water. Rust is common even on Mars. The planet's trademark color comes from the rust that's been there for a very long time. That's how the red planet got its nickname in the first place. Normally, you wouldn't say the moon is a place that would rust that easily since it's dry and doesn't really have an atmosphere. But a spacecraft studied the moon back in 2008 and detected spectra, wavelengths of light, that were reflecting off different surfaces of the moon. That's why it could analyze the lunar surface better. The data it brought showed that the lunar poles had different compositions than the rest of the moon. They had rocks that contained a lot of hematite. That's a specific type of iron oxide, or simply rust. No one expected that because there shouldn't be so much rust on the moon, considering the conditions there. But we know that there's some water up there on the surface of our satellite. That's why a few new theories popped out about different materials the moon could be hiding. It's possible that they formed because water had reacted with the rocks. For iron to get this rusty hue, it needs something we call an oxidizer. That's a molecule that removes electrons from materials like iron, such as oxygen. But the solar wind keeps hitting the moon all the time, and it brings hydrogen with it. And hydrogen has the opposite effect. It gives electrons to other molecules. Earth has its shield from the solar wind. It's our magnetic field. But the moon doesn't have such protection, and because of that, rust shouldn't be able to form on its surface. But this process still happens, and it could be Earth's fault. The moon itself doesn't have an atmosphere that could provide enough oxygen for iron to rust. But apparently, our planet is generous enough to donate some of its own atmosphere. The oxygen from our atmosphere travels all the way to the moon, following something called magnetotail. That's a long extension of Earth's magnetic field, which can reach the near side of the moon. That's exactly where most of the hematite was found. And during a full moon, the magnetotail blocks 99% of the solar wind, which would normally influence the moon more. It's like there's a temporary curtain over its surface, which gives enough time for rust to form. But there's still one important thing necessary for the appearance of rust: water. It's not like you can find water that easily if you decide to take a walk across the moon. Most of it is frozen and hidden in areas that always remain in cold shadows. Those spots are far away from where most of the hematite was discovered, so it's hard to tell how the water got there. But there's an interesting idea. All those dust particles that hit the moon might be freeing free molecules of water that are locked in the surface layer of the satellite. This is how water ends up mixed with iron. We don't know exactly what these dust particles consist of. They might be carrying some water too. As they hit the lunar surface, this might create heat, which boosts the oxidation process, and more rust forms. So, our planet does certain things that change the moon, but humans do the same. A probe that landed on the lunar surface back in 1959 was the first human-made object that touched the moon. That's also when we started altering the moon in unpredictable ways. Scientists call this the lunar Anthropocene. It's like an analogy with Earth's Anthropocene, a period when human activity made an impact on the planet. It's not like we can choose a certain starting point when such an activity began. But we now know that things we have done over the history of our existence have really changed the environment of our home planet. We don't have any people living on the moon yet, but we've already left some traces there. After humans first came to the moon, we've had many missions there. We left some landers and flags, moved lunar soil, brought golf balls, scientific equipment, and even some human waste. Plans for the future? Send more missions up there and even potentially create an infrastructure where some of us could live, study the moon's resources, and send them back to Earth. That's why it's important to talk about the lunar Anthropocene to remind ourselves we have to be responsible and take care of our heritage. Many people are confused about why we sometimes see the moon during the day. Some even believe it's something new that didn't happen before, especially after they started sharing a low-res picture of what looks like a full moon in the middle of the day. Some have pretty unusual ideas that the sun isn't the same color as it was before either. Allegedly, it used to be more yellow. The sun hasn't changed its color. It's still blue-green. But it's possible that we saw it as more yellow when we were younger because before, pollution wasn't as bad. And when it comes to the moon, we can see it both at night and during the day. It's brighter at night because there's no light coming from the sun. But it's not like it goes anywhere during the day. It's still there, but we just don't see it during the new moon phase. That lasts a couple of days, and during that period, the moon comes pretty close to the sun. The scattered light coming from the sun makes our satellite less visible to us. Speaking of the moon phases, they're easy to recognize when you know what to pay attention to. First, there's the black moon, which can mean a couple of things. One definition says that it occurs when we have 2 new moons in a month. Another one claims that the black moon happens when there's no new moon in a month, and that only happens in February. A blue moon is not called that because of the color. It's the 3rd full moon in a season that has 4 full moons. And a supermoon occurs when a full moon coincides with the moon's closest approach to Earth in its elliptical orbit. That's why it looks bigger than usual. Sometimes you can look up to the night sky and see an eerily red sphere up there. It's not about signs that tell us that the end of the world is coming or that werewolves are roaming around. But yep, blood moon is a good inspiration for stories like that. In reality, it's just an astronomical event when our planet casts a reddish shadow on the moon. And that happens when Earth comes between the moon and the sun, which is called a total lunar eclipse. Earth's little companion catches some red light coming from our atmosphere, and that's why you see that specific color. People haven't set foot on the moon in several decades, but the situation is going to change soon. NASA's Artemis program is going to send a few missions to Earth's natural satellite. The first astronauts might step on the surface of the moon already in 2025, as part of Artemis 3, if the current schedule holds, that is. And then the next stage will start, and it will be an even more ambitious project than sending humans to the moon again. NASA wants to construct a base camp at our satellite's south pole. Such an outpost will help the Artemis mission to break the previous record for the longest stay on the moon. So far, it's 74 hours, 59 minutes, and 38 seconds. Plus, such a camp can serve as a jumping-off point for missions setting off for deep space. According to NASA, at first it's going to be a small camp, accommodating missions for a week or two. But soon, it'll grow in size and complexity and will be able to sustain crews for a couple of months at a time. There might also be an open-top rover similar to the one used in the Apollo missions and an RV. These options can provide mobility for astronauts while they live and work at the camp. With each new trip, the level of comfort of space explorers will increase. Specialists are now developing the technologies that will help people to work more easily on the moon, far away from home. There's also hope that building such a camp can help us prepare for an even more challenging step: human exploration of Mars. For the camp to function properly, it's very important to be able to find and extract resources from the satellite's rocks and dust. These resources can include water ice, metals, oxygen, and even some building materials. It'll help to lighten the load with supplies delivered to the moon. It can also potentially allow astronauts to remain there for longer periods of time. Now, why the lunar South Pole? There are two very important reasons. First, building the base camp there will allow astronauts to have periods of continuous light from the sun. The moon is tilted in such a way that its south pole experiences up to 2 months of continuous light every year, when the sun is circling above the horizon all the time. And all this abundant sunlight can provide the camp with a lot of solar power. At the moment, NASA is trying to design a solar array that could stay more than 30 feet in the air. This way, it'll be able to make the most of the available sunlight. The second reason for choosing this location is deep craters that have been shrouded in darkness for billions of years, also because of the moon's peculiar tilt. Some of these craters haven't seen sunlight since the time of their formation. They're also known as permanently shadowed regions, and that's where scientists have found evidence of water ice. If we manage to access this frozen water and it turns out there's a lot of it there, it'll be hugely valuable for the inhabitants of the base camp. Plus, it might supply flights back to Earth, or further on to Mars. We don't know yet whether there's a lot of water in that region or whether it's free of contaminants, but NASA is going to find out. One of the ways to do it is to use Viper. This mobile robot is likely to arrive at the lunar South Pole in 2024. The Lunar Terrain Vehicle, or LTV for short, is scheduled to arrive on a mission in 2025. Astronauts will be able to operate it remotely, and it's likely to be able to avoid such hazards as rocks and craters on its own. Astronauts will then explore their surroundings either from the safety of the lander on earlier missions or later on from the base camp itself. Plus, NASA will use the LTV to conduct scientific or mission-related work even during periods of time when there will be no humans on the moon. The vehicle will play a crucial role in searching for water ice and other resources. But even though the LTV's remote-controlled capabilities are quite innovative, its design isn't going to change much. It'll look almost like the rovers that have come before it. If astronauts decide to drive the vehicle with its top open, they will have to put on their spacesuits, and that's not very comfortable. donning such a suit can easily take hours. Plus, the duration of missions always depends on how much oxygen each astronaut's spacesuit has left. That's where NASA's RV-like concept, known as the Habitable Mobility Platform, comes into play. If this project succeeds, the RV will have a pressurized interior and life support systems, meaning passengers will be able to have a ride without their spacesuits on. This will definitely make life easier for astronauts. The final design of the vehicle isn't ready yet, but the main goal is to allow several people to live and work inside the vehicle for up to 2 weeks. Now let's have a look at what the future lunar cabin might look like. Its design hasn't been finalized either, but NASA is looking at modular and inflatable structures. It may help to create larger spaces for crews to live in. Plus, such kinds of structures are more compact and lightweight, so it will be easier to transport them to the moon. But there's one more intriguing possibility. How about a large-scale 3D printer that will use lunar soil and rock as its raw material? Such a machine might be able to produce bricks and other shapes, assembling dwellings from scratch. A prototype 3D printer is now building a test structure in Houston. Also, the first towns on the moon could probably be built in craters. They might be covered with protective materials like plastic, reinforced with a net made of titanium and UV-resistant superfiber. The inhabitants would have to access their homes through airlock entrances dug into a mound. Bilbo Baggins would surely appreciate their aesthetics. On the moon, gravity is way weaker than on our home planet. And while it can make it easier for astronauts to walk and even run on the moon's surface, it's not so great in the long run. That's why inside the lunar base, there might be an artificial gravitational field. Without it, people would have problems with coordination, balance, and orientation in space. Plus, weight-bearing bones would lose 1 to 5% of mineral density per month. A geologist from the University of Notre Dame, who's been studying samples of lunar soil, says that rocks or dust may have a key role in protecting astronauts from radiation coming from solar flares and cosmic rays. On Earth, the planet's atmosphere and its magnetic field filter out most of this harmful radiation. But the moon doesn't have the same shield because there's no atmosphere like on our planet there. The very weak one that our natural satellite has is made up of some unusual gases that haven't been found in the atmosphere of Earth, Mars, or Venus. That's why people working there will need extra protection. The experts say that up to 6 feet of lunar material might be needed to shield astronauts from the radiation. But besides building materials and water, there's another crucial resource on the moon, and it's oxygen. NASA hopes to start extracting this gas from moon rocks. They also hope to find metals like aluminum. This could allow astronauts to live off the land, and the base would become much more self-sufficient than expected. It could turn into a resupply station for spaceships heading for Mars. But a colony on Mars would cost us trillions of dollars to construct and inhabit. It would take a long time for even one cargo ship to reach the red planet. Lunar camps are much easier to build and maintain. There will likely be direct spaceship routes connecting the satellite with Earth, and people will need just 3 days to travel between these 2 points. That's one of the reasons the colonies on the moon will be growing, developing, and changing non-stop.
Now look at this fancy granite kitchen countertop. This one can also be available on the moon. I mean, there's no production whatsoever as of now, but there's enough raw materials for the kitchen of your dreams. And by the way, granite on the moon can even prove this dark horse had plenty of water at some point. So it all started when scientists found this weird blob of heat on the far side of the moon. It's all because of a massive chunk of granite that's buried underground. Apparently, granite is pretty rare outside of Earth, so this is a big deal. According to the researchers, there's this old volcano on the moon that hasn't erupted in like 3.5 billion years. But it turns out it's still giving off some serious radiation. The scientists used a fancy new method with microwaves to measure the temperature below the moon's surface. They found this area that's about 31 miles across, where it's like 18 degrees warmer than the rest of the place. And it's right under a spot that collapsed and is full of silicon. It's not as thriving as Silicon Valley back on Earth, it's just a volcanic crater, but without all the lava spewing out. The scientists even compared it to those granite rocks you see in Yosemite, like El Capitan and Half Dome. You know, those giant rocks that look super majestic? Well, apparently, they're made of the same stuff. Researchers claim that granite is super common on Earth, but not anywhere else in our solar system. So, this could change everything we know about other rocky planets. Right, now we know there's granite on the Moon, but why is that important to us? So, you know how granite forms on Earth? It's all thanks to water and plate tectonics teaming up to create these huge blobs of melted rock beneath the surface. But guess what? The Moon doesn't have any of that action going on, which makes granite super rare up there. But this discovery could give us some clues about what the Moon was like back in the day when it had volcanic activity. Without water, making granite becomes a real challenge. But somehow, someway, they found granite on the Moon. No water, no plate tectonics, but still, we got granite. So what does that mean? Did the Moon have water in this one spot? Or was it just ridiculously hot? I guess we'll need to give a tad more time for the scientists to figure it out. The water on the Moon is an issue, though. Duh. As of now, the Moon is bigger than the Sahara Desert, but somehow 100 times drier. Astronomers have been debating for ages whether there's any water on this celestial neighbor of ours. But in 2020, NASA's SOFIA mission finally confirmed that there is indeed water on the sunlit part of the lunar surface. Turns out those grains of lunar dust have little molecules of H2O hanging out on them. Back in 1645, when people first started gazing at the Moon, they were fascinated by these dark spots all over its surface. Dutch astronomer Michael van Lengren even made a map and called these spots Maria, which means seas in Latin. Sorry, Michael, they're just actually plains of basalt from ancient volcanic eruptions, but we still use the term Maria today. In 1892, an American astronomer named William Pickering discovered that the Moon has practically no atmosphere. No clouds, no atmosphere, no chance for water to stick around. So, scientists started thinking that the Moon was as dry as a desert. But then, in the 1960s, a theoretical physicist named Kenneth Watson came along with an idea. He suggested that water ice could actually exist in the shadowy craters of the Moon that never see sunlight. These areas are called permanently shadowed regions. It was a mind-blowing concept at the time. The Apollo missions from 1969 to 1972 finally gave us the chance to look for water on the Moon up close and personal. But when the astronauts brought back soil samples, there was no sign of water. So everyone went back to thinking the Moon was bone dry. However, in 1994, NASA's Clementine mission suggested that there might be ice in these shadowed craters after all. And in 1998, the Lunar Prospector mission found evidence of hydrogen concentrations in the permanently shadowed areas. This was a strong indication of water ice at the lunar poles. The images weren't super clear, but it was still an exciting discovery. And finally, in 2008, scientists decided to take another look at those Apollo samples. They revisited the old data and found some hints that there might be water after all. It was like finding buried treasure in your own backyard. As you can see, the Moon is a pretty promising destination. It even has enough stuff to produce your food supplements – calcium, magnesium, you name it. Just kidding, it's not the best idea to munch on them to boost your diet. But there are a bunch of other applications they can be used for. Calcium is like the fourth most popular element hanging out in the lunar highlands. But here's the cool part. Pure calcium metal is actually super flexible and can conduct electricity like a boss when there's no oxygen around. Who knew, right? Anorthite is a rare gem here on Earth, but up on the Moon, it's partly central for calcium. It can even help make those groovy silicon-based solar cells. To make them, you need some lunar silicon, iron, titanium oxide, and of course, our buddy calcium and aluminum. It's like a recipe for solar success up there in space. The Moon even has precious metals like gold. In 2009, NASA was on a lunar mission and they found some gold in the lunar soil. They had a spacecraft right behind the rocket, equipped with a fancy spectrometer. Its job was to study all the debris that got released when the rocket crashed. And they found all sorts of chemicals, like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, ammonia, sodium, hydrogen, and even a little bit of mercury, gold, and silver. Hey, vampires beware. Now I know it's been quite a while since then, like 14 years to be exact, but measuring how much gold is actually there has been a real challenge. You see, it's hiding deep beneath the lunar regolith, making it tricky to get an accurate count. Yeah, metals are fun and lunar water may have existed, but what about food? Good news, everyone! Scientists are saying that plants can actually grow on the moon, but don't expect a luscious orchard. It'll be more like a moderate garden with just a couple of beds. Here's the scoop. A while back, those awesome Apollo astronauts collected samples of lunar surface material called regolith and brought them back to Earth. Fast forward 50 years, and NASA decided to use 3 of those samples to try growing plants for the very first time. They used dirt from under the lunar rover bumper to grow these plants. The team added water and seeds to the samples, giving each plant a gram of regolith. Then they placed them in a clean room and added nutrient solutions every day. And they succeeded. During that challenge, the brilliant minds dealt with small plants like mustard greens in the nutrient-poor lunar soil. Yeah, we'll have to export olive oil from Earth to dress it. So, plants can indeed grow in the moon's soil. However, they won't be as strong and healthy as the ones grown on good old Earth soil, or even the ones in the control group grown in a lunar simulant made of volcanic ash. But hey, it's just a start. We're still to find out if our dear moon is hiding more treasures.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Is one of the most famous quotes of all time. But was it really what Neil Armstrong uttered on July 20th, 1969, as he set foot on the moon for the first time in human history? It looks like it both is and is not. Thousands of people back on Earth who were following the historical event heard the phrase without one small detail, the indefinite article, A.
It's one small step for man, step for man.
There's no such thing as small details when it comes to grammar, and the absence of A slightly changed the meaning of the whole sentence, since man and mankind became synonyms in that case. It basically meant, that's one small step for mankind, one giant leap for mankind. Neil Armstrong himself told the press after the Apollo 11 mission that there definitely was an A there, but people just didn't hear it. 30 years later, at the event's anniversary, Armstrong couldn't hear the article while listening to the recording of that famous transmission.
It's one small step for man.
He explained that he wasn't the most articulate person, and he left a lot of syllables out. So it could have been a suppressed sound, and the voice mic simply failed to pick it up. But he insisted that A had been intended, as without it, the statement wouldn't have made sense. In 2006, a computer programmer backed up Armstrong's words with some digital magic.
It's one small step for man.
He ran the audio through some software that singles out nerve impulses and saw it in the graphic form of sound waves. It became obvious that there was a 35 millisecond long bump of sound between 4 and man. It was too brief for other humans to hear, but Neil clearly did leave room for an A. Several years later, Ohio State University studied the speaking patterns of Central Ohioans, like the first man on the moon, and noticed that they often leave out words like for and A. In a BBC documentary, Armstrong's younger brother Dean mentioned that he had seen the quote written on a piece of paper months before the mission. Whether it really happened or not remains a mystery because he had never mentioned it before the documentary. Like with many famous quotes, people tried to find some symbolism behind Armstrong's words. One of his biographers suggested that the quote was inspired by the astronaut's love for J.R.R. Tolkien's books. There was a similar line in The Hobbit. Not a great leap for a man, but a leap in the dark. He found that connection because Armstrong had a Tolkien-themed email address in the 90s, and after retiring from NASA, moved with his family to a farm dubbed Rivendell. It was also the name of a valley and the home of Elrond, the half-human, half-elf from Lord of the Rings. Armstrong himself denied that connection since he hadn't read any of Tolkien's books before going on the Apollo 11 mission to the moon. Others believe the quote was based on the NASA memo. Going to the moon was no walk in the park, so it was important that the first person there pronounces some iconic words about it being a historic step forward for all mankind. Again, the astronaut denied having any memo. He later shared that it had just been the most logical and right thing to say. Armstrong literally had to go a long way to make that legendary step. He took his first airplane ride at the age of 6 in a Ford tri-motor plane with his father, and that's when he fell in love with aviation. He was an active Boy Scout and earned the highest possible rank, Eagle Scout. On his 16th birthday, he became a licensed student pilot before he got his driver's license. He then went on to study aeronautical engineering. His program involved 2 years of university studies at Purdue University, then leave for 2 years of flight training and 1 year of aviator service before returning to finish his final 2 years. While at Purdue, Armstrong joined a fraternity and wrote and directed a musical for the school varsity varieties. He was investing so much effort in his version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs that he got a C that term in psychology for engineers, a C in aircraft vibrations, and a D in electrical engineering. During his aviator service, Armstrong had to eject from the plane over the water. The winds were taking his parachute back to land. When he thought that was it, his friend from flight school in a service vehicle picked him up and saved his life. Armstrong came back to Purdue, completed his degree, got married for the first time, and became a civilian research pilot right after. The couple moved to California, and whenever he flew over their house, Neil would tip the wings for his wife and son on the ground to see it was him. He had over 1,100 flight hours testing various supersonic planes and the X-15 rocket plane. He wasn't able to apply when the U.S. Air Force was recruiting for the first Man in Space Soonest program in 1958 because they didn't accept civilian test pilots. In April 1962, NASA accepted applicants again for Project Gemini, and this time he was eligible. Neil handed in his application past the deadline, so it was only thanks to a flight simulator who had known him and slipped the application in the pile that he got into the space program. Back then, he wasn't considered NASA's #1 pilot and flew as a backup crew. In 1966, Armstrong became the first American civilian in space, and together with David Scott, pulled off the first manual space docking maneuver. And that's where things have gone wrong. After docking, a rocket thruster had a meltdown and the spacecraft started spinning uncontrollably. They had to separate from the Agena. Armstrong took back control of the Gemini spacecraft, and they managed to perform an epic emergency splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. Then, it was time to choose who was going to become the first human on the moon. It had to be a civilian, and the decision makers at NASA chose Armstrong for that honor. Some people believed it was because he had a likable personality, quiet confidence, and was working hard on the way to the stars, literally. To prepare the astronauts for landing the lunar module and the reduced gravity they'd experience, NASA ordered practice vehicles to be built. In early May 1968, at just 98 feet above the ground, Armstrong's vehicle started rolling without control. He had to act quickly and eject to save himself. Later analysis proved that if he had done it just half a second later, that would have been his final moments. On July 16, 1969, Armstrong, along with other members of the mission, took off for the moon. NASA built the Saturn V, the most powerful rocket that had ever flown successfully, to take them there. It was as tall as a 36-story building. 4 days later, they reached their goal. After spending 21 hours and 36 minutes there, leaving their footprints, which are still visible on the moon's surface, collecting surface samples, taking photos, and testing scientific instruments, and headed back to Earth. Armstrong didn't enjoy public attention that much, so he decided to take up a teaching career. He became famous worldwide, but he still had to work hard to defend his master's thesis at the University of Southern California. He then retired from NASA and moved back to Ohio with his family, where he would teach for the following 8 years. He didn't cut the connections with NASA altogether and worked with them on several commissions, helping the investigations into both the Apollo 13 malfunction and the tragic Challenger space shuttle incident. In 1985, Armstrong journeyed to the North Pole with a group of fellow explorers. It made perfect sense that he wanted to see it not only from space, but from the ground level. For his giant leap for mankind, Armstrong was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the Congressional Space Medal of Honor, and the Congressional Gold Medal.
NASA has some incredible plans for the moon. For example, their next ambitious lunar program, Artemis II. They've set their sights on landing astronauts, including the first woman and the next man, on the moon by 2024. Artemis is all about building a sustainable presence on the moon. They're planning to establish a lunar gateway, a sort of space station in lunar orbit, which will serve as a jumping-off point for lunar landings. And let's not forget about the cool lunar landers. Scientists are developing the mighty Space Launch System rocket, which will launch the Orion spacecraft carrying astronauts towards the moon. Then there's the Human Landing System, a snazzy lunar lander that will gently touch down on the moon's surface, allowing astronauts to explore and conduct amazing scientific experiments. And NASA isn't going alone this time. They're teaming up with international partners, like the European Space Agency, to make this lunar dream a reality. But all these wonderful dreams might be ruined by something that seems super small and insignificant at first. Picture this: no atmosphere, no air to breathe, and suddenly, a mysterious haze and radiant beams of light appear at sunrise and sunset. It's as if the moon is putting on a celestial show. But there is a twist to this beauty. During the Apollo 17 mission in 1972, this beautiful sight made one of the NASA astronauts, Harrison Schmitt, sneeze and made his eyes water. He called it lunar hay fever. This mysterious fever affected all 12 moonwalkers. From sneezing fits to stuffy noses, those astronauts experienced symptoms as if they caught a cold. It took days for the reactions to fade away. This event led to a discovery about lunar dust and its darker side. When scientists found out about these rays, they rolled up their sleeves and delved into their origins. And here's what they discovered. Those radiant bands of light were actually caused by sunlight sneaking through layers of teeny tiny lunar dust. The dust was composed of small particles and sharp glass shards and was lurking everywhere. And it turned out that this lunar dust was a sneaky villain. It brought a whole host of problems. Astronauts who found themselves with impaired vision were just the beginning. The troublemaker went even further, damaging precious machinery and causing electronic malfunctions. It even had the audacity to corrode components and smelled like burnt gunpowder inside the spacecraft. Yikes. It clings to everything, coating surfaces like a mischievous blanket. It can clog up equipment, get into delicate machinery, and even mess with astronauts' spacesuits. In 1972, things got really hairy again. The Apollo 17 astronauts faced a nightmare. After just 22 hours of gallivanting on the lunar surface, their spacesuits suffered irreparable damage. Yes, you heard that right. Irreparable. The dust diminished astronauts' mobility, making it harder for them to move around and perform their moonwalks with grace. And no matter how hard they tried to clean it off, it clung on for dear life, leaving the spacesuits in a sorry state. So, as you can see, it poses some serious challenges for future moon missions. But our intrepid scientists aren't giving up. To solve this problem, they have to understand how lunar dust forms and why it's so darn clingy. They found out that it all begins with meteorite impacts. When these space rocks crash into the moon, They generate a fine dust that fills the air. Sometimes these impacts even cause minerals to melt, forming sharp glass shards that mix with the dust. Talk about a moon makeover. The dust is also filled with silicate, a material commonly found on volcanic planets. Silicate inhalation can cause serious lung problems for Earth's miners, so you can imagine the trouble it can cause on the moon. A recent study found that even a scoop of replica moon dust was toxic enough to destroy up to 90% of lung and brain cells exposed to it. But it gets worse. The low gravity on the moon allows those tiny particles to float around for much longer, penetrating deeper into the lungs. Imagine breathing particles 50 times smaller than a human hair for months. That's a recipe for trouble. And you see, on the moon's surface, things are a bit different than here. There are no rainstorms or strong gusts of wind to blow this dust away. There is also no atmosphere to protect the surface. So without the natural forces of wind and water erosion like we have on Earth, these dry particles stick around persistently. And to make matters more electrifying, the moon is constantly showered by radiation from the sun. This exposure gives the dust an electric charge. The solar winds create positively and negatively charged particles. The particles then buzz around, repelling each other and giving rise to those radiant bands of light that the Apollo 8 astronauts witnessed. It's like a disco party on the moon. ESA, the European Space Agency, has gathered a team of experts to study the lunar dust. They're working with simulated moon dust mined from a volcanic region in Germany to understand its behavior and effects. Engineers also need to find a way to protect future astronauts and equipment. Engineers in NASA want to create spacesuits that can survive not 1, not 10, but a whopping 100 extravehicular activities on the lunar surface. That's like spending 800 hours out there, exploring and having a blast. Besides that, NASA initiated the Breakthrough, Innovative, and Game-Changing Idea Challenge in 2021. It was open to clever university students from all over the world. These young minds put their thinking caps on and unleashed a wave of innovative solutions. For example, they proposed using special fibers that conduct electricity, inspired by fluffy chinchilla hair. Just like how chinchillas stay dust-free, these fibers would help keep the lunar dust at bay. A furry friend lending a helping paw, isn't that adorable? Another bright idea involved an electrically charged brush activated by UV radiation. It's like a magical wand that zaps away the dust with a flick. Abracadabra, lunar dust be gone. And let's not forget the fabric inspired by clever insects. These insects have pollen-collecting structures that repel unwanted dust. So our ingenious students thought, why not mimic that? They designed a fabric with similar properties, creating a shield against the sneaky lunar particles. What's remarkable about these ideas is that they all use the power of charge to fight the dust. They cleverly repel it from the spacesuits, keeping them clean and protected. And even though all these ideas sound pretty great, scientists in NASA unleashed another, even better solution: carbon nanotubes. It's a great way to revolutionize spacesuit fabric. What makes these carbon nanotubes so special? Well, they possess some amazing superpowers. First off, they're superconductive, meaning they can carry electricity like nobody's business. It's like having a lightning bolt trapped inside a microscopic tube. Not only that, but these carbon nanotubes are tougher than the toughest meteors. They have the strength to withstand the harsh lunar environment, where even a speck of dust can cause trouble. Imagine having a suit made of a material that's stronger than Superman's cape. So, NASA's scientists decided to weave these extraordinary carbon nanotubes into the spacesuit fabric. The electrodes were carefully integrated into the outer layer of the fabric, making it a force to be reckoned with. But how do they banish the lunar dust? Well, here comes electrifying science again. When activated by a special alternating current, the electrodes create powerful electric fields. These fields work like magnets, repelling both charged and uncharged dust particles away from the spacesuit. Picture this like a dance party, where the dust particles are the uninvited guests, and the electric fields are the bouncers, swiftly escorting them out. Thanks to this technology, lunar dust doesn't stand a chance against our astronauts. Also on the bright side, the lunar soil can be used to make bricks for shelters. It can also help extract oxygen for astronauts to survive on the moon for long periods of time. When life gives you lemons, make a lemonade, right? So, let's cheer on our NASA Dream Team as they embark on this epic lunar quest. Let's hope that they succeed in their findings, and the next moon mission won't be a big problem. Stay tuned. Put on your shades because Mercury is a hotspot. From the surface of this planet, the sun looks 3 times bigger than it does from Earth, and the light is 11 times brighter. Mercury may spin slower than Earth, but it still knows how to have a good time. One day on this planet lasts a whopping 59 Earth days. But don't worry. A year on Mercury is only 88 Earth days long, so if you want to feel like a centenarian, just divide your age by not 0.25 or multiply it by 4. This way, you'll get your approximate Mercurian age. Easy peasy. And let's not forget about Mercury's funky orbit. For every 2 orbits around the Sun, it spins twice. That means each hemisphere gets a full year of daylight followed by a long night. Time zones would be a mess on this planet, so we'll just stick to GMT. Ugh, did anyone forget to take out the trash? Why does it smell of rotten eggs in here? Sorry, it's because we're on Venus now, and these stinky clouds don't smell like roses. Any planet's day is basically just how long it takes for it to do a full spin on its axis. Well, Venus takes its sweet time with this, way slower than Earth, in fact. So a day on Venus lasts a whopping 243 Earth days, or almost 6,000 hours. Now here's where things get a bit tricky. Because Venus's day is so long, we actually use Earth's day as standard for keeping time on the planet. That means there's only one time zone for the whole planet. Seems convenient, huh? Venus's year is about 225 days. So if you were celebrating New Year's Eve on Earth in the year 2000, that would have been Venus's year 3251. So to keep track of time of Venus, we can use the local year, made up of 225 Earth days, but every 3 years or so, there's an extra short year made up of only 224 days. Not that confusing. We have leap years on Earth too, but it works a bit differently. We've made it to planet Earth. Woohoo! How many time zones do we have on this big blue ball? Give me a drum roll. 24. And did you know that we can actually mess with time a little bit? Yup, in about 80 countries, mostly in Europe and North America, we have something called daylight saving time. It's where we move our clocks forward an hour during the summer so we can soak up all that sweet, sweet sunshine. But beware, each country has its own rules about DST. So make sure you don't get caught snoozing when you're supposed to be working. And get this, some regions even have time zones that differ from UTC by half or quarter-hour increments. Can you imagine that the moon is getting its own time zone? The European Space Agency announced on Monday that it's time for the moon to have its own synchronized time zone. With more and more countries and private companies planning missions to our lunar neighbor, it's important that we all speak the same language when it comes to timekeeping. Right now, each mission carries Earth's coordinated universal time with it, which is fine when there are only a few missions happening at once. But with dozens of moon missions planned over the next few years, things are going to get tricky. We need a system in place to make sure everyone's on the same page, or we'll end up with different spacecraft out of sync with each other, and nobody wants that kind of chaos in space. Precise timekeeping is super important for communication and navigation, so we need to figure out a way to make sure everyone's on the same page. The ESA hasn't figured out exactly what form this new lunar time zone will take, but they're working on it. Should there be a single organization responsible for keeping lunar time? Or should we let the moon set its own time? And what about more granular time zones based on the sun's position? These are all important questions that need to be answered. When it comes to a day on Mars, it's not too different from a day on Earth. We're talking 24 hours, 39 minutes, and 35 seconds. A Martian year is 1.8 Earth years, which means the Earth year 2000 happened in Martian year 1063. Almost forgot. The Martian year has 668 local days. Phew! We sorted out the Martian calendar, but Mars will need local time zones. Because of its elongated orbit, the difference between summer and winter hours will be significant. Daylight saving time will be a thing on Mars. A year on Jupiter lasts almost 12 Earth years. Yeah, that's like a lifetime in dog years. But don't worry, They've got 12 seasons to keep things interesting, each almost as long as an Earth year, but a day on Jupiter only lasts 9 hours and 55 minutes. Also, since Jupiter doesn't have a solid surface, the clouds move at different speeds, so 2 free-floating atmospheric stations could experience different days. Hey, if we lived on Jupiter, we'd be in bad need of some cool app tracking all those things. Anyway, if we ever terraform Jupiter's region, most of the population will still live on Jupiter's moons, because the atmosphere is just too wild. And get this, the moon's revolution periods are connected, so we can use the same day counting system for all of them. On Io, we can have 2 standard Jovian days in 1 Earth day. How do we break that down? Well, we could have a minute of 53 seconds and an hour of 103 minutes. Or we could just stick with Earth's minute and hour and have a day that's 21 hours and 13 minutes long. How old are you? I'm 200 days old, and you? Sounds odd to you, Earth dweller, but dudes on Saturn count their age in days. A year on Saturn is crazy long, like more than 29 Earth years. Kiddos would only get a fraction of a year, while the oldest folks might get a whopping 3 years. So to keep track of time on Saturn, we could divide up a Saturnian year into 29 or 30 seasons. Oh, and fun fact, Saturn doesn't even have a solid surface, just rotating clouds that spin at different speeds. But we could still set up some cool research stations or helium extraction balloons to float around up there. 1 Uranian year lasts a whopping 84 Earth years. So to make things easier, we'll stick to using Earth years for our calculations, and natural Uranian years can be used for special occasions, like reaching 1 Uranian year old. As Uranus doesn't have a solid surface, the rotation period is all over the place. Only science missions and helium mining companies are brave enough to venture into the atmosphere. And get this, each moon has its own day and date system. Pretty confusing. Most people won't ever celebrate 1 Neptunian year old. 1 year on Neptune is like that's way too long for us humans to stick around. But don't worry, we'll still bust out the confetti and party hats for special occasions, like when it's been 2 whole years since the first spaceship hit up Neptune. As for the rest of the time, we'll just use Earth years for all our business needs. Pluto takes a whopping 240 Earth years to orbit the Sun, which is way too long to use as a year in our everyday lives. A day on Pluto is almost like a week on Earth. So, to keep track of time, we're going to divide that into 6 standard Plutonian days, 3 of light and 3 of dark. That means a standard day on Pluto will last slightly more than 1 Earth day. Now, because Pluto's axis is super tilted, using time zones would be pointless. So we'll just use 1 time zone for the whole system. Easy peasy. As for the standard Plutonian year, it'll be almost the same as the Earth year, about 343 days. But once in 10 years, we'll throw in an extra day just for kicks. That's all for now. See you on Pluto.
Prepare for blast-off, because there's some exciting news from NASA coming our way. Care to look into the fascinating world of Saturn's moon, Titan? NASA's groundbreaking Dragonfly rotorcraft lander is set to take off in 2027, looking to explore this mysterious space object. Now let me introduce you to Titan. It's an icy celestial body with an atmosphere filled with nitrogen, and it might even have an underground ocean. Titan is also home to rivers and lakes that flow on its surface. But guess what? They're not filled with water like our lovely planet. They have methane instead. Now let's check out Titan's celestial credentials. It's not just any moon. It's the 2nd largest in our entire solar system. It's only 2% smaller than the biggest moon we have hanging around our neighborhood, which is Jupiter's Ganymede. Titan's size even puts Mercury to shame. And did I mention that its atmosphere is 4 times denser than that of Earth's? Thanks to Titan's lower gravity and thick atmosphere, Dragonfly is the perfect robotic companion to uncover its hidden treasures. Let's move on to Dragonfly, the star of NASA's upcoming mission to Titan. This cosmic drone is not your average explorer. Equipped with a full array of interesting gadgets, Dragonfly is like a flying laboratory, ready to uncover more secrets of Titan. It's the first interplanetary rotorcraft lander probe, designed to take us on an epic journey of discovery. And don't let its name fool you. Dragonfly won't just buzz around aimlessly. This technological marvel is able to glide for several miles between different locations on Titan's surface. Think of it as a cosmic Uber service for scientists. And speaking of technology, Dragonfly is carrying some seriously cool equipment. It'll feature the Drill for Acquisition of Complex Organics, DRACO, instrument, which will help us scoop out material from Titan, while the Dragonfly Mass Spectrometer, DRAMS, will analyze what these samples are made of. But how did we stumble upon Titan? It was March 25, 1655, when a Dutch astronomer was out there with his telescope exploring the cosmos. Lo and behold, he spotted something amazing. It was Titan, the biggest moon of Saturn. Fast forward almost 300 years to 1944, when another cool astronomer jumped into the picture. He was doing some experiments with light when he figured out that Titan actually has its very own atmosphere. There's more to this story. In 1979, the Pioneer 11 spacecraft decided to take a joyride through the Saturn system. It confirmed all the cool things scientists had previously speculated about Titan, like its temperature and mass. However, there was one tiny mistake. Those sneaky scientists thought Titan might be the biggest moon in the entire solar system. Oops, wrong guess. Nevertheless, Titan had this mysterious, dense atmosphere that kept everyone on their toes. Now let's zoom in on the 1980s, when the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecraft make their grand entrance. These cosmic explorers flew past Saturn, and they wanted to get a good look at Titan's surface. That's when Titan decided to play a game of hide-and-seek with them. Its hazy atmosphere made it impossible to see what was going on down there. So all the Voyagers managed to capture were images of a lonely orange world. However, they did spot a fancy blue haze hanging out in the upper atmosphere. Things started to get really exciting in the 1990s. The Hubble Space Telescope joined the party and decided to take some cool snapshots of Titan using special infrared light. This clever device managed to pierce through the haze, and voila! The Hubble images revealed differently colored areas on Titan, almost like a giant cosmic chessboard. We now know that there's even a bright spot as wide as Australia down there. However, despite these fantastic pictures, the mystery of what lay beneath Titan's haze was still unsolved. It was 2004 when the stage was set for Cassini and its European sidekick, the Huygens probe. They were like the ultimate dynamic duo, ready to take on Saturn. Cassini started orbiting the ringed planet and immediately focused its attention on Titan. The big moment finally arrived. On January 14, 2005, the Huygens probe pierced through Titan's atmosphere. During its descent, Huygens collected all sorts of amazing data, snapping images and analyzing the atmosphere. The probe then transmitted this valuable information back to Cassini, which, like a cosmic courier, sent it to us eagerly waiting Earthlings. Over the next 13 years, Cassini flew close to Titan over 100 times, using all sorts of fancy instruments to get a good look at the moon's surface and atmosphere. Scientists could finally confirm that Titan had clouds, lakes, and rivers, and there was also some rain pouring down its surface. Thankfully for us, Titan isn't the only moon in our solar system that could technically harbor life. Take the wondrous moon of Neptune called Triton. For starters, it's the largest moon of Neptune, but it's also a real oddball. Among the many moons out there, only 5 are known to be geologically active. And guess what? Triton is proudly part of this exclusive club. It loves to show off its geysers, which spew nitrogen gas. Picture Triton as a fashionista in an icy ensemble. Its surface is mainly frozen nitrogen, giving it a chill, frosty vibe. You might want to bring a warm coat if you ever visit. Now, you may be wondering how Triton manages to keep warm in such a frigid environment. Well, it's got a secret weapon called tidal forces. Imagine Triton and Neptune engaged in a cosmic dance, creating gravitational friction. This dance seems to generate some heat, helping to warm up Triton's waters. With all this talk about heat, you might be getting excited about the possibility of life on Triton. However, finding life on this moon is about as likely as finding a unicorn riding a skateboard. Voyager 2, the only mission to ever fly by Triton, made its journey back in 1989. And if you're hoping for another mission to Triton anytime soon, well, let's just say the stars aren't aligning in our favor, literally. The window for a mission to Triton opens up only once every 13 years, because our planet and Jupiter need to be perfectly aligned for the landing to work. Scientists would use the gravitational pull of the largest planet in our solar system to safely deliver a probe on Triton. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the polar bear. It's so cold on Triton that hopes for life to survive unfrozen are about as slim as a toothpick. Sorry, potential little microbes. You might need a few extra sweaters to set up shop down there. Even though Triton may not be the most welcoming place for life, it's still a celestial gem worth exploring. Scientists also believe Triton wasn't always a part of Neptune's crew. As it turns out, Triton was most likely just minding its business, hanging around aimlessly in the distant Kuiper Belt. Along came Neptune with its mighty gravitational pull and snatched Triton right out, officially making it a moon of its own. Just like our trusty satellite, Triton is also stuck in a permanent face-off with Neptune. One side of Triton always has its eyes locked on the planet. As for this amazing moon's fate, things aren't looking so good in the long run. It's already getting closer and closer to Neptune every day. Why is that, you might wonder? The problem is with those tidal interactions, which are playing some cosmic tricks on Triton. They're causing its orbit to wither away, like a slow-motion dance towards Neptune. Scientists predict that in about 3.6 billion years, Triton will cross an invisible boundary. If these current calculations are correct, there are two possible scenarios. It'll either have a collision with Neptune's atmosphere, or it might just break up into tiny pieces. If the latter happens, an all-new ring system would form around Neptune, just like the one we see around Saturn nowadays. Triton is not the only satellite that might end up this way. Phobos, one of the Martian moons, is likely to disintegrate too, and sooner, in 30 to 50 million years.